Hi guys, welcome back to What Is This Weapon with, possibly for the first time, technically not a weapon. This is a flare pistol, or a signal pistol if you prefer. Of course they can be used as weapons, have been used as weapons, and the Germans even created a weaponized version of one of their flare pistols, the Kampfpistole, which we might come to one day. But this is not for hurting people with. It's for attracting attention, it's for sending messages, specifically in this case, distress at sea primarily. This is the Japanese Type 90 flare pistol. I say the, confusingly, there are two main versions of this. This comedy 3-barreled version looks a bit like a hairdryer. You can actually find a video on this from our friends at Forgotten Weapons if you'd like to check that out. We'll set this aside though, because we are here to cover the 2-barreled version. Now, I have to admit to some pop culture inspiration as to why I've chosen this for this particular episode, which I'll fill you in on later on with some nerdy ramblings. But let's look at this in a bit more detail. So flare pistols, in a British and American experience, they're typically sort of 1 inch in bore. This is 28 millimeters, a little bit more than 1 inch, 1.1 inches thereabouts. You need enough size of round essentially to convey something burning in a color, given color, out to a certain height. So they tend to be pretty substantial. There's no point popping off 9mm flare rounds, as it were. Although you will find blank firing pistols or traumatic pistols with little flare cup launchers. You'll find mini flare launchers that do launch tiny little flares, but to be seen at the sort of distances you're talking about at sea, you need something on the order of 1 inch. So this is 28mm. Construction-wise, it's a little bit reminiscent of a shot pistol or a Howder pistol, something like that, a double-barrel pistol, but it has that very high bore over the wrist there. And critically, so if you were looking at this and didn't know what it was, you'd probably spot it as a signal pistol because it has no sights. Weird ergonomics with a very, very high bore over your wrist and no means of aiming, because of course with a flare pistol, you don't need to aim per se, you just need to point it in an appropriate direction. On top, we've got what looks like a hammer. Sort of functions like a hammer insofar as it cocks the internal strikers, but those being strikers tells you it's not actually a hammer, it's just a cocking lever. So that the pistol is now cocked, and this thing is now flapping in the breeze somewhat. Now that seems to vary example to example. This one's in pretty good condition, it's all tightened up, so I think when cocked there would have been some play with this, but again, you're just sort of yeeting flares into the sky. You're not too worried about this flapping around. That then, you can then see your strikers are cocked. So I'll demonstrate to you how it's fired. So fire selector in the middle position does nothing. On the right position, fires the right barrel. And unsurprisingly, on the left, fires the left. And you can now see those strikers are pretty far embedded in the body of the gun there now. If I then cock it again for you on camera, you'll hopefully see them pop out. When this lever is returned, those strikers are not protruding at all. They're not, weirdly, considering you might well be using this in the dark, you cannot feel that the thing is cocked. It's not like a loaded chamber indicator. This thing being Type 90 Japanese, it's introduced in 1930, so it's substantially later than that. So a little bit of a surprising thing that's only just popped into my head. You cannot tell that the thing is cocked without looking at it. Even the Luger, designed very beginning of the 20th, or introduced very beginning of the 20th century, of course, 1904, 1908, naval version 1904, that has a tactile as well as a visible loaded chamber indicator. So these strikers could easily have served as that. In fact, when the cocking lever's in its fully rear position, they do protrude. So a little bit of a surprising design choice there. Now, you probably saw me fiddling with something off camera there. That's the safety. So it does have a very conventional trigger bar safety. I'll show you how that works in a moment, along with the rest of the interior, which is thankfully very easy to see on this. You'll notice this is marked S. I'm not entirely sure about this. This thing does have an Imperial Japanese Navy marking on it. Let's show you those now. So on the top of the body, there is the little anchor. That's the naval symbol, Japanese Navy symbol, ownership mark. To the right of that is I believe it's the katakana for the word 2, which I gather means inspection, so an inspection mark. So those are your military or naval markings. So on the face of it, this is a naval pistol, not a commercial version. Come back to that in a moment. We then have our serial number, relatively low serial number, and this is indeed the first pattern of this type. Spot that from the opening lever, which I'll show you in a moment. Later type has just a sort of angled flat lever, rather easier to operate, but we'll come to that in a moment again. And the final mark there is the logo of the Kayaba Manufacturing Company, founded in 1919, made various different things, including flare pistols. So on the face of it, this is a Japanese service pistol. It has the patent numbers, the 2 patents that apply to this design and to the 3-barrel, I believe. Try and check on that. On there, with the English abbreviation, PAT. So between that and the S, you might think this is an export variant. And I'm a little confused by that, I must admit. If anybody knows in the comments why this thing appears to be a Japanese service pistol, but it's also got English on it, please do let me know. Because we do, in fact, have on our 3-barrel variant what I would have expected, which are your Japanese characters for safe and fire. Now, before we pop this open to show you a bit of the workings of this, I should show you an earlier example that we have. It's not in as good condition, so we're not focusing on it today, but it does have these wooden grips, and those are not marked with any indication of the safety. So up is fire, down is safe. So it's possible that early on, because I believe the wooden grips are earlier, that there was no indication of whether you were on fire or safe. This also has this presumably original lanyard cord attached to the lanyard loop, which is nice. It's just a shame that the rest of it is a little bit sort of frosted with corrosion, so we'll focus on the one with the black grips. Now, I haven't yet shown you how this opens up. So there's this backwards looking trigger device here. We push that forward and we pivot down. It's awkward to pull off. The sort of mechanics of the hand don't really lend themselves to that without putting your fingers in front of the muzzles, which isn't a great idea, of course. So you have to pull that forward enough to unlatch it. There's your latching point and the equivalent hole or matching hole in the breech face there. So that's how it latches together. At this stage, the barrel latch and the extractor to get your empty cases out, or your live rounds if you haven't fired them, are one piece, all one piece. One of the later version, the version with the lever opening system, has an extractor based up here. So there are changes through the life of this thing. So that's how you load it, pop it open, shove in a couple of rounds, close it up. Not much to see on the breech face apart from the latching hole and the 2 firing pin apertures with the firing pins visible, possibly. So let's pop the grips off because we can see a bit more of what's going on in there. So we've got one screw at the top, one at the bottom. There are the polymer grips of the later patterns. And under there are a couple of things going on. First of all, there's our trigger freely coming to the rear to release the strikers with the safety on. All that's doing, probably see that, is it's physically imposing itself, as it were, on the sear. So little nose there where my fingertip is, comes up as you push down. Simple lever, like a seesaw, and it physically bars the trigger from coming to the rear. Very simple safety. What's more interesting, I think, is this spring here. Now that's not the main spring to actually cock the thing. It doesn't move when you cock it. It's not connected to it. if you've seen Forgotten Weapons video on the 3-barrel, you'll know what this is. This is the recoil mitigation system. So very little amount of travel there. I'd say about 7mm, something like that. Just enough to cushion the blow to your wrist and your hand of firing a fairly sizable round. And that is connected via this lever here to this coil spring down here that floats in the grip. It's adjustable, so you can turn this little nut here and that will give you more or less spring pressure. I don't know what the parameters were supposed to be for that. I'm just leaving it as it is. There's a fair bit of pressure needed, but not too much. And I would imagine that's going to bottom out regardless. But it'll just take a little bit of the shock out of the impulsive firing. Only other thing we can see under here are some fairly visible welds, but they're quite nicely sort of dressed off so that the grips will fit and it won't look rubbish when it's assembled. So I think flare pistols, signal pistols are often overlooked precisely because they're not weapons. In this case, I was inspired by a movie where this thing absolutely is a weapon. So recently I got to see the old classic action movie Demolition Man, 1993, Snipes and Stallone. It's a classic in my book. Contains an amazing scene of a museum. My favourite movie version of a museum.
Credit for a violation of the verbal morality statute.
Yes! Now, this is what I'm talking about.
For various reasons. I even used it in a conference paper once, although I forgot to censor the clip, which was amusing. Anyway, what is it in Demolition Man? If you haven't seen it, or if you're thinking, I don't remember seeing that in that movie. I didn't either. So the main sort of anti-hero character, Edgar Friendly, that's Dennis Leary, basically just being Dennis Leary in that movie. And he's a sort of, I guess he's a flavour of libertarian against the sort of fascist government that's in the movie. And he uses this as I think it's meant to be like a rocket pistol. It blows big holes in things. It's fired direct fire, not obviously as a flare pistol. It just looks like a big scary handgun, like a shot pistol or a powder pistol. And they obviously cast this as his weapon for story reasons. They thought, it looks gritty, it looks underground. Literally, they're based underground, the Resistance in that movie. I don't know why they didn't go for the 3-barrel. Personally, I think that looks even cooler. I think they were going for a bit of the Mad Max kind of 2-barrel handgun thing. Obviously, that was a sawn-off shotgun in the Mad Max movies, but that's my impression. And the version in the movie is this pattern, but with the wooden grips that I showed you earlier. You can barely see them. This is deeply nerdy content that I'm delivering for you here. So back in the real world, this thing does change over time. That latch gets replaced with a lever where you just pinch and pivot, much better than having to force that out of its notch without putting your hands in front of the muzzles. Yeah, not a great design. The extractor is separated from the locking mechanism. That's basically it. So it stays in service, I believe, throughout the Second World War in IJN service, alongside the 3-barreled version. So this one I think has to be early 30s. It's in the 3000 serial range. It's the Type 30, or Type 90, 1930. And it has the earlier features. It does have these plastic grips. They may have been replaced as discussed. Now the company Kayaba, a lot of the companies we mention or reference in this series are long since defunct. Well, Kayaba still exist. They are KYB now. They're a multinational, and they make all sorts of car parts, sort of aftermarket car parts like shock absorbers. So that company is still going. Now, as you might have guessed, although we don't have any real detail on the history of these individual pieces, like a lot of things in the collection, they will have been captured during the Second World War when these things were still in service. Now, I've only just really realised that we haven't featured Japanese firearms very much at all. So, without tipping you off to any future episodes, I hope we can revisit the very distinctive sort of firearms and weapons culture of Japan. There's some very unique designs out there. So perhaps if there are any Japanese firearms that you're particularly interested in, let us know in the comments, and who knows, they might crop up in the future. Thanks so much for watching this episode, everyone. As ever, please do check out our website, our brick and mortar museums here in the UK. Definitely check out our partners' History of Weapons and War. So you can watch our content there without advertisements, which is nice. But it's all the same content from us. And a number of partners who, well, friends really, people we've been working with for years in various different ways, who cover well, weapons and war in very interesting ways. So please do see if that's something you would like to sign up for. There's also our Royal Armouries membership program, which gives you various benefits, including sort of behind the scenes access of different types. So again, check out the website for more information on that. But we'll see you here on this channel next week.